I wanted to make this video for a long time. I'm finally doing it, and I am going to just get as real as possible with you. If this is your first time here, be sure to subscribe to this channel where we choose growth, gratitude, and joy for a carefree lifestyle. And there's nothing more carefree than quitting a job that you can't stand and no longer want anything to do with. Now, one of the things I write about on the blog quite often is how I used to be a teacher and I no longer am a teacher. And I've never really gotten around to explaining my story, why I'm not a teacher anymore, what drove me out of the profession. And the reason I didn't do it is because it's so hard to just talk about it, and I wanted to script it and make it this big production. But I decided that the best way to do this would just be to get really real. So that's what I plan on doing here. Now, this video is not going to be a long negative rant about how horrible the profession is. I look back on my time in the classroom with nothing but gratitude, and hopefully you see that and get some inspiration that no matter how bad your experience is with teaching, you can find some good in it and carry it forward into a new career, which is what I did, and I now have the job of my dreams. And I'm sure I'll end up talking about that a little bit as the video goes on. So I want to just start at the beginning, which is, when I was a teenager, I was thinking about different jobs that I was going to do, and all the guidance counselors, my parents, everybody was talking about how important it was to make a decision when you're in like grade 11. You're like 16 or 17 years old, and this decision is supposed to define your career path and essentially your life. So a lot of pressure for a teenager. And so I made the decision to pursue teaching. I was always really good at math, and I used to help, the other students in my class at lunchtime and that sort of thing. So I just naturally made the decision to start teaching math. But what I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to at that point in my life was a lot of the personality traits I had that didn't make me a very good teacher in some regards. I've always been a perfectionist and super anxious in front of people. I hate public speaking. Talking to the camera right now makes me nervous. And the only person in the room right now is my cat. So you'd be thinking, why would you make a decision to go into a profession where you're expected to stand in front of a class with confidence and explain things clearly? Well, I had a lot of pressure from my family to go into a well-respected career, and teaching just seemed like the right fit at the time. But at the time, I just didn't spend enough time thinking about the right balance between my strengths and my areas for growth, which rightfully so. How can you when you're a teenager who's spending most of your time playing video games anyways? At any rate, I went off to school. I studied math for 4 years, went through all of the teacher education, and I remember a day where an HR person came in from one of the school boards at the time and essentially explained how hard it is to get a teaching job. And the message was that we really should just quit and not pursue teaching at all. This was obviously very discouraging to me, and somebody who's a perfectionist started thinking about things like, oh, what if the interview doesn't go right? Or, what will this mean for me if I can't get a job teaching? So there's a lot of negativity and sort of self-doubt, which is not the best way to start a career. Later in the year, one of the school boards was conducting interviews to start as a supply teacher, essentially the lowest possible position as a teacher. My wife and I both had interviews for this supply list. And I went into that interview, just a hot mess. My perfectionist fixed mindset tendencies took over. I had to rehearse all my answers. I just had no idea how to do that interview. And so naturally the interview went horribly, but for my wife, it didn't. She got her supply teaching job. I did not get my supply teaching job. And I was left feeling even more discouraged than before. The challenge of getting a teaching job was now just that much greater. So that led to a pretty large meltdown and a lot of questions about whether or not I will even end up teaching. But as fate would have it, I ended up applying to a tutoring position at an international boarding school that then ended up hiring a long-term occasional position. And after that, I ended up teaching for 5 years. But I'm not teaching now, so let's get into where it all went wrong. So right away, given my history with teaching and applying to become a teacher, I was so grateful to have a teaching job that I just held on to it so tightly. And no matter what came my way, I would overcome it and just become the best possible math teacher out there. Again, being a perfectionist, this made the teaching job really, really intense in my mind, and probably way more intense than it had to be. I was spending entire evenings and weekends preparing lessons. I remember fine-tuning my lessons to the pixel just to make sure that nothing could possibly go wrong, because it was so important that I was the best at this job so that I never lost it, because it was so hard to get. Which in hindsight, it was actually pretty easy to get because I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But that's the way these things tend to work. I went through my first few years just working really hard and just being super passionate about math. Ask any student who I taught during those 5 years, And if they knew that I was no longer teaching, their head would explode. When you clicked on the thumbnail for this video, you saw the math vest bow tie combo. I used to literally wear that teaching. I love math a lot, more than the average person, probably more than the average math teacher. But the thing is, passion can only carry you so far. My strength of being really good at explaining things and engaging young minds in a topic that really is not engaging only carried me so far, because the other side of my personality, which was the perfectionism and all the anxiety surrounding my work situation, just ended up sabotaging the job for me. It's also one of those jobs where the demands are so high and are changing every day. Not only are you expected to be able to explain your subject area, but you're also expected to be a guardian of sorts that looks after these very vulnerable young people, while also being a coach, mathlete, not an athlete, and you're carrying all of your work into the evenings with you. So those are all of the things that were really starting to pile up. And on top of all of that, my wife and I ended up having our first daughter during my 3rd year of teaching. So I was finding myself no longer really having the time to fully engage in the profession like I used to. If I stayed up all night prepping and fine-tuning pixels in my lessons, I would pay for it substantially. And it wouldn't just be me who was paying for it, it would be my wife and my daughter now as well. Because I was working at an international boarding school, I was also staying out really late doing dorm duty and all these sort of weird, unconventional jobs that a lot of teachers don't have to do. And so I was missing a lot of stuff. I would come home and my daughter was already asleep, and I'd be out of the house doing parent-teacher interviews on weekends, coming home and being so exhausted speaking with parents about really high conflict situations that I would just fall asleep on the couch and I'd miss the entire Saturday. So I think a lot of what I've said so far, you probably relate to as a teacher, because you're in the profession, you're experiencing those demands, maybe not the exact same demands that I was, but you are experiencing them, and in some way you're starting to think, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. And the first thing I need to tell you is that there is no shame in that at all. If you're like me and you're a perfectionist, quitting is literally failure shameville central. The very idea of leaving a job that I'd worked so hard to get and being a perfectionist, it was just too much for me to even think about at the time. Fortunately, my wife, who had recently also left teaching to focus on being an excellent mom, made me realize that it is never too late to change careers. There's a lot of people that leave their job within the first 5 years of doing it. Gone are the days when you went to school and you got your dream job and you stayed with it till the end. That doesn't really happen anymore, especially for young people. My wife and I pieced together some sort of income for many years until we finally got some sort of stability. This is the part where I inspire you to make a change and actually make the decision that is right for you. You need to think about the strengths you have and maybe the things that you need to work on, and you need to ask yourself the question, do my current circumstances allow me to refine those areas of growth? Or are the circumstances in my life at this point preventing me from doing that? You will never hear me blame circumstances, because I firmly believe you can always take control of your life and make the change that is right for you. But in my case, I was a new father who was missing life. My decision was value driven. I can work harder to overcome the perfectionism and the anxiety and all that sort of stuff. But at that point in my life, did it make sense to prioritize that? No. I wanted to be at home, swaddling a baby and singing it to sleep. That's where I want it to be. I still want to do that. And as it turns out, me leaving teaching led to me finding my absolute dream job, which I still am doing 4 years later. There are other jobs for teachers. In my case, I've always really been good with computers and technology. So as a teacher, I started teaching online. Before I knew it, I was developing content online. And at this point in my career, I am now a web developer that uses HTML, CSS, JavaScript to build really highly interactive math lessons for students. So while I'm not standing in front of the class, I'm now behind a camera. Sometimes I'm not on camera, which makes it easier, or I'm just planning out and developing really cool stuff for students to learn math. So I'm still using my strengths of engaging students in a really non-engaging topic. I'm not using my area of growth of being nervous about stuff all the time and being a perfectionist as much, but I have the space to now focus on that area of growth. I can sit down in the safety of my own home, and I can spend as much time on a task as I need to get it right, which also lets me realize that some tasks just don't have to be perfect. And I also get to use another strength that I really should have thought about when I chose my career back in grade 11. The tricky thing is there is no answer. My strengths and my areas for growth combine to form my personality. So you really have to balance those two out when you're making a career decision. Can you do that? Grade 9, grade 10, grade 11? Absolutely not. But that should be liberating for young people because we are no longer required to make our life decisions that early on in our life. With a growth mindset and being able to overcome challenges and setbacks, we can transition from one career to the other pretty seamlessly. All you have to do is be true to yourself, be true to your values, and look for the opportunities. So as this video went on, I got a lot more comfortable sharing my story. I'm hoping that it inspires you in some way to either solidify your decision to leave teaching, or maybe you've realized that you actually have a lot more strengths that make you better suited to staying in the classroom than I did. Regardless, I hope this video helps. For more on growth mindset and getting the courage to consider leaving your job, check out the link to the blog in the description below. Hey, thanks for watching, and remember to choose growth, gratitude, joy, and good vibes. And if you like this video, why not subscribe?